Panasonic made waves last year when they re-entered the US TV market, with the Panasonic Z95A as their 2024 flagship. This year's Z95B sits at the top of Panasonic's lineup and replaces that model. The big architectural change is under the hood. Instead of the Z95's NLA, the Z95B adopts the same primary RGB tandem W OLED panel found in the LG G5. The tandem stack is engineered to push higher brightness and color volume while keeping OLED's native black levels. Driving that panel is the HCX Pro AI processor Mark II, and the feature list ticks a lot of boxes. 2 HDMI 2.1 ports for 4K at 144Hz, VRR support across HDMI form VRR, FreeSync and G-Sync compatibility, and full support for both HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision. On paper, that sounds like the ideal do-everything OLED. The question is whether the measurements and the day-to-day experience back it up. Hey, I'm Evan from RTINGS.com, and after putting the Z95B through the full test suite, the answer is a confident yes, with a few caveats that matter to power users and gamers. If you care about HDR brightness, the Z95B will put a smile on your face. In filmmaker mode, a 10% HDR window reaches 2,354 nits, and a 2% window comes in at around 2,303 nits. That lands the TV squarely in premium OLED territory. Nice. Game mode barely puts a dent in TV's brightness. If anything, it's slightly brighter. We love it when a TV lets you game with all of its faculties intact. Power is one thing, discipline is another. The Z95B tracks PQ EOTF exceptionally well. Near blacks aren't lifted and midtones sit where they should. The TV does hard clip content mastered at 600 and 1000 nits, but it doesn't matter as the TV is easily bright enough to fully display most highlights mastered at those levels. The TV tone maps to preserve details in very bright highlights with content mastered at 4000 nits. The result is that HDR content looks as though the colorist intended, yet still punches hard when the content calls for it. In SDR, the Z95B is bright enough to handle everyday living rooms. Real scene brightness lands around 513 nits, with generous headroom with smaller highlights, reaching up to 960 nits in 2% peak windows. Reflection handling is very solid for a glossy OLED finish. Direct light sources still appear as mirror-like shapes on a black screen, but the panel reduces their intensity, and colors and blacks remain intact under ambient lighting. The bottom line is that you can still watch daytime sports or news with the lights on and get a pleasing, punchy image. HDR color volume is a strength. The tandem W OLED stack gives the Z95B the headroom to render bright, saturated colors without any washout, while OLED black levels preserve dark, saturated shades. Out of the box, color accuracy in HDR is outstanding. One interesting quirk about the Z95B. Unlike most TVs, which set their brightness to 100 when the panel switches to HDR, the Z95B sets itself to 70 instead. Raising the brightness above 70 acts like a dynamic tone mapping feature, artificially brightening midtones at the cost of accuracy. So our results were all done with brightness set to 70, and oh boy, is the TV accurate then. In SDR, the story is the same. 100% Rec 709 coverage, amazing tracking, and a natural, convincing color palette. So far, this TV does everything well. We love it. The same story continues with image processing. Upscaling and artifact cleanup are excellent. Cable channel sports, DVDs, and heavily compressed feeds hold onto their detail well, and macro blocking is reduced without the scene turning waxy. Gradient handling in HDR is very good, particularly with HDR10. Most grays, reds, and greens show little to no banding, and blue gradients retain smooth steps in typical scenes. Still, you'll notice some banding in darker grays and in brighter greens. Plus, there's a catch with Dolby Vision. Banding is more noticeable in that format than in HDR10. It won't ruin the experience, but if you're sensitive to banding, it might annoy you. One other artifact to mention for viewers sitting close to the screen. Because of the panel's dithering, faint diagonal line patterns can be visible in uniform areas or soft gradients. On a couch at normal TV distances, you won't notice it, but as a PC monitor replacement at 2 to 3 feet, it can be distracting. If you care about gaming specs, the Z95B has the right ones. 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs support up to 4K at 144Hz with VRR, and input lag in the low latency preset is very low across 60Hz, 120Hz, and 144Hz. Response times are effectively instantaneous, so motion looks crisp at high refresh rates. Fast camera pans and particle effects don't leave trails beyond the small amount of persistence blur at 60Hz you'd expect with sample and hold displays. The TV plays nicely with PS5 and Xbox, and PC users get the flexibility they'd expect. Because HDR brightness doesn't crater in game mode and PQ tracking stays well behaved, you get both responsiveness and a high-impact HDR look while gaming. There are two practical limits to keep in mind. First, the set has only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports. If you run multiple 2.1 class sources, you'll be juggling inputs if you don't have a receiver. Second, as mentioned earlier, Those using the TV as a monitor might notice the diagonal dithering lines. The TV has an integrated 5.1.2 system that's meant to act as a soundbar. It works. The Z95B is one of the best sounding TVs on the market. Dialogue clarity is solid, and there's a sense of width and height that you don't get from typical downfiring stereo speakers in thin TVs. It's still not a substitute for a good soundbar with a sub or a full AVR setup, especially if you care about bass extension and dynamic range, but it's still better than most built-ins. Note that the TV does not pass through DTS formats over eARC, so plan your system around Dolby formats if you don't have a DTS-compatible receiver or a soundbar with HDMI inputs. There's no getting around the fact that the Z95B is a premium product with a premium price tag. Its measured performance justifies that in many ways, but it sits in a neighborhood with fierce competitors. The LG G5 uses a similar tandem W OLED approach, hits comparable brightness, and often sells for less. Samsung's S95F takes the QD OLED route and can be more affordable while offering higher refresh support across its 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs, though it gives up Dolby Vision and has different processing trade-offs. If you want Panasonic's tone mapping, discipline, color accuracy, and overall tuning in one chassis, the Z95B earns its keep. If you're price sensitive, shop carefully. Alright, let's tackle some of the comparisons in depth. First, the LG G5 OLED. This is the most natural head-to-head. Both sets use a tandem W OLED approach and target very high HDR brightness. The Z95B's PQ tracking is outstanding and very similar to what the G5 aims for after its recent firmware improvements. Color accuracy out of the box is a strength for both. The Panasonic has 4K at 144Hz with VRR on 2 ports, but the LG supports up to 4K at 165Hz on all 4 of its ports, really beating the Z95B to the punch. That makes the LG the clear winner for PC gamers, or anyone with a ton of high-speed HDMI devices. The one caveat with the G5 is that you still need to run it in filmmaker mode while gaming to avoid any of the excessive banding in HDR10. Otherwise, the Panasonic supports both HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision, while the LG is limited to just Dolby Vision. The Z95B's built-in 5.1.2 system makes it feel more complete out of the box, but the G5 is thinner and is meant to be wall-mounted. The Panasonic is a chunky boy in comparison. In many markets, the G5 undercuts the Panasonic on price while delivering a similar HDR experience. So value hunters might end up with a G5. If you like the Panasonic's look and want the better built-in audio, the Z95B makes sense. But for our money, the G5 is the value pick. You prefer to go with Samsung? Samsung's QD OLED competitor plays a slightly different game. Peak HDR brightness is in the same ballpark. However, color volume in vivid, high saturation HDR scenes can feel even more expansive on QD OLED thanks to the panel's native color characteristics. The S95F also offers 4 HDMI 2.1 ports that support up to 4K at 165Hz, which is attractive for PC gamers with the hardware to push it. On the flip side, the S95F lacks Dolby Vision, and the Samsung's processing is generally a bit worse than the Panasonic, though it does handle gradients better. If you want Dolby Vision, better onboard audio, and processing, the Z95B feels more neutral and disciplined. If you want maximum gaming flexibility with more 2.1 ports and don't care about Dolby Vision, the S95F is a compelling alternative. The kicker here, again, is price. The Samsung is usually sold for less, making it the better value overall. If you're coming from last year's Z95A, you trade MLA for a tandem W OLED stack. The Z95B pushes brightness very high, has slightly better image processing, is more colorful, and just better all around than its predecessor. If you already own a Z95A and are happy with it, there's no real rush to upgrade, even if the new model is noticeably better in every way. If you're choosing between clearance Z95 inventory and the Z95B at full price, the newer model is the better long-term pick if the price gap isn't huge. Keep in mind that the Z95A is only available in a 65-inch size, so the newer model gives you more options there. The Z95B is one of the few OLEDs that can credibly claim both best-in-class HDR pop and best-in-class accuracy and processing. It's bright where it counts, it follows the PQ curve like a pro, and it ships with color that respects the creator's intent. It adds wide-gamut colors that don't wash out, low input lag with 4K at 144Hz VRR for modern consoles and PCs, and a viewing angle wide enough for a big room. Still, you give up 2 extra HDMI 2.1 ports compared to some gaming-focused rivals, you lose 165Hz support, and you pay a premium. If those trade-offs make sense for your setup and for your wallet, this is a fantastic flagship OLED that earns its spot on the shortlist. Well, that's it for a review of the Panasonic Z95B. What do you think? Are you satisfied with Panasonic's second stab at the high-end OLED market? Or will we be going for one of its contemporaries instead? Tell us in the comments. For now, I'm Evan from RTINGS.com, where we help you find the best products for your needs. Those gaming-focused rivals, and you lose 165... Okay. Wide enough for a big room. Still, you give up 2 extra HDMI. I just have to read the words on the teleprompter. They're there. I don't have to add anything to it. They're in front of me. Okay.